the mesh pants. You won't be getting any sleep. Where they cut in your lady bits. It's gonna feel like it's burning. But oh no, 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 no. Poops. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Gemma. I have two daughters, Elizabeth and Penelope, hence the name Ellie and Nellie. So as you can probably already tell from the title, I wanted to talk about postpartum recovery. I've been on a bit of a rant this week with friends that are pregnant, friends that have had babies, and I feel like we don't get told the reality of the recovery stages after having a baby. Personally, I feel like we all have this fear of childbirth. It's instilled in us from such a young age that we grow up to be scared about giving birth. And I mean, that's a whole other issue, a whole other video. It baffles me because actually having gone through it twice now, out of being pregnant, out of the labour itself and recovery or the fourth trimester, to me recovery is the hardest out of them all, hands down. That is the toughest challenge I've ever been through. Obviously these are like my experiences because I can only go off what I have been through. I just know that obviously only having had two children, I only have two labours to go off and two recovery stages to go off, so I'm not a professional by any means. I just feel really passionate that more women should know what the recovery actually involves. So obviously it makes sense to start from the beginning. So straight after you have had your baby, you have transformed into a mother, or you've maybe had your second or third or fourth baby. The only way I can describe that time after you've had a baby is like you're on another planet. It's weird. Even looking back on those first few days now, it feels like it was a dream. You feel dazed and blurry, and you're obviously exhausted because you've spent however long in labour. You'd like to think your body's pushed a baby out, you've not slept for probably maybe even a couple of days. That was definitely me with my first. You'd like to think you would go to sleep at this point. I would have liked to have thought so too. But for some reason, this like daze that you're in and the fact that you've just transformed into a mother, you can't sleep. You're exhausted, your eyes hurt, your eyes burn because you're that tired, and all you can do is stare at your baby. They're like next to you, they're absolutely fine. They're probably fast asleep because they've just been through labour as well. And you think, I'd better get some sleep because obviously this baby's going to wake up soon and probably want a feed. But oh no, 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 no. You won't be getting any sleep. So I'd had Penelope overnight. I'd started to feel that contractions were at intervals at about 9 p.m. at night, and she was born by 3:40 a.m. And then by the time the midwife left, it was like 7 a.m. So we was up all night. My mum, so very kindly, because I'd had a home birth, said she'd tidy everything up and we could go upstairs to bed. I don't know. You just sit and you just stare at your baby. And it's lovely. Like, obviously there's no regrets, but just roll with it. Just go along with it, because one day you'll get some sleep. I'm not going to promise when, because Penelope's 10 months old and still doesn't really sleep, but no, she's getting better. So this is the part where, depending on how straightforward or complicated your delivery was, it will depend on what recovery will happen at this point. So with Elizabeth, I had an episiotomy, which is where they cut down there in your lady bits. So let's just get this straight first as well. I was in my own world. I was just, how would you put it? I just wasn't there. I don't remember most of the end of Elizabeth's labour, because afterwards, when they asked to stitch me up, I was like, oh, did I tear then? And no, the doctor had cut me open. So he'd stood at the end of my bed, he'd checked everything out, checked out the situation. He'd asked me if I wanted one, he'd explained what one was, and obviously asked for my permission. And obviously I must have said, yes, that's fine, which I feel like I would have done. I feel like by this point I probably would have just been like, do whatever you need. But because I had an episiotomy, I bled so much more because of it. So after they stitched me up and I stood up out of the bed, I collapsed on the floor, passed out multiple times. Like, I remember coming back into the room at one point to like 6 people carrying me to the bed, and then the next time I woke up, they had needles all in my arms trying to get like fluids in, but they couldn't find any veins. They were trying to get blood, but I'd lost that much blood, they were struggling to find anything. But because of that, the recovery from Elizabeth's labour was much more intense. So I had stitches with both, Elizabeth being the episiotomy, and then Penelope I just had like a graze, so it wasn't much. She just kind of put, I think it was like 1 or 2 stitches in. You have to be prepared that sitting is going to hurt. It will hurt to wee. It's gonna feel like it's burning. When you do your first and maybe the first few poops after labour, it's going to feel like they are going to rip. They won't. They do check after they've stitched to make sure they've not stitched that bit closed. So just be prepared. So then, because I had a lot of blood loss and I then had 2 blood transfusions, so this is for a complicated delivery, I couldn't leave the bed for 5 days. On that 5th day, I finally managed to drag myself out of bed and get a shower, and even then it felt like the room was spinning because I was that dizzy. I'd gotten up to go to the toilet. Once I finally got that shower, things started to improve. Even after, so it was like day 5, even at the end of day 5 in hospital, I wasn't sure if I was okay, because they asked me if I wanted to stay in hospital and I didn't, because I didn't like being in hospital anyway. 5 days felt long enough, but even then I was still walking around feeling really dizzy, and looking back on it I probably should have stayed in another day. Following on from that, so when you get home from the hospital, night sweats is a thing. I don't know if everyone gets these, but I've had it both times. Brandon's home. Here he is.
Have you cut the grass?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yes.
Where was I?
Maybe I'll get a couple of beers. Got a 4-pack.
So yeah, for me, night sweats was a thing. I just would wake up boiling hot, like sweating, like the bed was wet with sweat. It was horrible. And it was almost like a panic, like I was panicking if the baby was okay or not. I think this is why postpartum recovery isn't talked about, because until you think back and really, really, really think about it, you actually just forget all of these things were a thing. Because obviously it's amazing having a new baby and it's so time consuming, I think we do just genuinely forget how awful it was. So in those first few early days, there's also the baby blues. I've touched on this in another video, and I'll pop that up here somewhere. But baby blues is when you get a bit down after you've had a baby, and it usually kind of kicks in like day 3 or 4. Usually when your milk comes in as well. It's all very hormone related. I mean, I've heard as well, when people get married, I can't remember what the term is, but people kind of crash down a little bit, because you spend sometimes years preparing for this one day. After all that time in preparation, and this one day happens, and then suddenly it's just like, oh, actually life just goes on as normal now, and people kind of crash sometimes after that. It's kind of similar to that, not in the sense that life's the same as it was and life just goes on as normal, because it definitely doesn't. But I think it's like a mixture of like overwhelming emotions about the fact that there's this little tiny baby that suddenly requires you to survive. Like, you have like sole responsibility for this tiny little baby. It feels like it's all on your shoulders a little bit, and I think that realization kicks in when those hormones all come crashing down. I didn't have them as bad with Penelope, which is weird considering I did have like that touch of postnatal depression, but the baby blues weren't so harsh, and I think that's maybe because it was my second time. Like, I kind of expected, and I was quite scared actually for the baby blues the second time around, so maybe because I was expecting it to happen, it just didn't. I also feel like I want to mention the mesh pants in this video. I'd make a whole video about the mesh pants if I could. I love them because you're sore down there and because you're bleeding, so I haven't actually mentioned this. Here he comes again. Oh, cherry. Thank you. Yeah, I love the bagels. We're getting more bagels. Yeah, I'd make a whole video about the mesh pants if I could. I loved them. So you bleed for quite a while after labour. Kind of like a period, but a really heavy period. And some people it lasts maybe a couple of weeks, but it can last sort of 6 weeks plus. And I feel like a lot of people don't mention this, but you can get little, this is probably like too much information, little blood clot things in it, and like you can feel them come out. Like, yeah, it's pretty gross. So yeah, because all this is going on, and because you're sore down there, and you're wearing pads because you're bleeding, and I mean, getting dressed is a painful experience after being in labour. Your body aches, and most of your clothes are quite tight, or feel probably a lot tighter than they did before you were ever pregnant. So these mesh pants, I feel like I might have carried on wearing them if it was socially acceptable. I just loved them. I didn't even know they were a thing until I had them and realised they were a thing. Also, another thing that I never knew, and my friend was telling me the other day, because I haven't had a C-section, but did anyone know that after a cesarean, you have to have injections? I don't know what they're for, but you have to have injections for like 10 days. Like one a day at the same time every day for 10 days after a C-section. Because I never knew this, and I feel like, why don't we know this when women go through cesareans all the time? Also, another thing that I felt in those first few days, this is really weird, but squeamish over like my belly area after you've had a baby. And some people don't feel this, but since I mentioned it, my friends have said that they did also feel it. And because when the baby grows inside your belly, they're taking up all that space where organs usually sit. So as they grow, the organs like come up here, like squished. That's why you struggle to you lose your breath sometimes, because your lungs are like squished up here and everything else is up here. So after you've had a baby, and when you stand up for the first time, or maybe the second time, I felt like a drop, and it all all the pieces of, even thinking about it now, like I just feel a bit sick, but all the bits inside my body like dropped, and I felt, it was just the worst thing. And so I feel like I wanted to just lay that out there. Also, I feel like I didn't know that when you leave a hospital, depending on your labour, I think, but you get a huge supply of pain relief and meds. For me, I had iron tablets, which I think I had like 4 tablets a day for a month, like a lot of tablets. And then you have your pain relief, which is just like paracetamol and ibuprofen. I don't know, I just feel like I didn't know these really simple things that I would need to get through the recovery of labour. I just feel like there should be more general knowledge than what it is. I also think it's worth mentioning that every journey as a mother, whether it's the first time or another time, knowing that your journey might not look like someone else's. So with Elizabeth, even though I felt horrible after her labour, the connection I had with her was like instant. Whereas with Penelope, whose labour was actually perfect, we were at home and it was so nice, but I didn't really get that click initially. It just wasn't there right from the very beginning. And a lot of mums can get themselves down with like mum guilt about that, because you expect for that maternal instinct to just kick in. And not that I didn't have that maternal instinct, because I already had Elizabeth and I loved her. Like I still wanted her, and she was still my baby. So it's just worth knowing that you might not feel the way that you expect you're going to feel all the way through your pregnancy. Same with things like breastfeeding. You might have always wanted to breastfeed, and when it gets down to it, you might be struggling with getting the latch right. You might perhaps stop breastfeeding earlier than you expected to, and you just can't like beat yourself up over these things, because you just have to make it your own journey and not compare your journey to other people's journeys.
Imagine if you had hair fever.
So I think that's it. I'm probably going to kick myself after I finish this video, because I'm going to think of so many more things that I could have mentioned. But yeah, I think I'm going to have to leave it there. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you want to see anything more from me, then please do hit the subscribe button below. Enjoy having a baby. Look after yourself as well. Thank you.